Hey, welcome back to my channel, and today as usual we are going to be continuing with the front-end libraries React certifications from freeCodeCamp. Okay, so without wasting much time, let's get started. Let's see what's today's lesson about. But before that, do not forget to start loving React. If you're not loving React, I'll make sure that you fall in love with React. Do remember to hit and smash that bell icon so that you do not miss any of my lessons on React towards your wonderful React journey and FCC React certifications. Okay, so this is about passing props to a stateless functional component. We've already seen what a stateless functional component is in our previous lessons. You may refer to my previous lessons. So here there's an app which is a parent and the child, which is a welcome component. So app component is a parent, welcome component is a child. The app component first creates a property, prop or a property, which is prop is short for property. And this property that is created in the parent is supposed to be a user property, right? And then it is passing, it wants to pass, or rather going to pass, the property or props, the user props, to the child component, welcome. Just as we get traits from our parents get the traits from our grandparents. So this is something like a family tree where properties are passed on from parents to the next children tree or child tree. So here, const welcome. So as you know, a function can also be written, the stateless function can be either written as function welcome and then inside the curly brackets, inside the parenthesis props, function props, right? But here we are using arrow function, so it's just const welcome and then the props. So here what is actually happening, the props here is actually the argument of that function. Remember that. If you write it in the function form, you will see. I request you to write that as a function in your code and check it out. Yeah. So const welcome is props, and then what's happening is after passing this property, which is a user's property, even the child can access this property which has been derived from the parent. Yeah. As you can see here, within the h1 tag, hello, and then how do you access it? Within curly brackets, props.user. That means it's a user property which is being accessed here by the child component. So this is the beauty of passing it first creating it in the parent, passing from the parent to the child, and then the child can access it in this way. Yeah, and basically, like it's mentioned here, props is a functional component, stateless, and welcome. In this case, is a stateless functional component with props as an argument. You can see that better if you write function welcome within parenthesis props and then the curly brackets and then write the h1 tag and the full coding. I want you to try that out. So now here you can see that it's accessing the value of the argument. Yeah, first it was just props only, then props.user, and then assign a value of the user in the parent, which was mark. So similar to that, a task has been given here, calendar and current date, which is already provided in the code editor. So what you need to do is, you need to render the current date from the calendar component. Yeah, so the calendar is actually the parent, working as a parent here. So the calendar parent should return a single div element. That's a task given. And the second child of calendar should be current date. It's already given there. So current date is a child, parent is calendar. And the current date component should have a property called date. Yeah, already given as a task. And the date property of the current date, the date property of the current date should contain a string of text. We will see when we code that. And the date property should be generated by calling date. That's a JavaScript object. And the current date component should render the value from the date prop in the p tag. As we know, current date as a child can render this value and also access the value of the property that is passed, as we've seen in the previous example of welcome component, from how it's rendering the property passed in from the parent, which is app. So it's similar to that. Yeah. So this is what the whole process about. Yeah. Okay. So just look at all the concepts again, then look at the code. Const current date properties, props, short in props. So that means the argument in this case is a props for the stateless function, which is current date. Yeah. Stateless functional component is current date. So it is returning a div as it's already provided in the task and it's already mentioned here in the code. And within the p tag, you need to write this, finish this code. The current date is, so what is the current date? Obviously, something to do with the property, right? And something to do with what property you are being asked to do? According to the task, the date property, because you need to render the date property, right? So here, how do you write? Just humanize it. If you humanize it in a non-coding way, if you're trying to say, I want to render the date property. So how do you write that? Within the curly brackets. The first thing you shouldn't forget is the curly bracket. And then inside the curly bracket, which property? Props.date. So which property? Props.date. In the previous one, which property? Props.user, because it was a user property. So very simple as that. So I want to render and access the date property, which is props.date within the curly brackets. Simple as that. If you use it in a statement like that. Then you go to your parent, which is class calendar, extends React component with the constructor props and the super props, render, return. Inside the div, you have an h3, yeah, the h3 elements. So what you need to do, change the code below this line, which is current date as a child is already rendering in the parent. Yeah, so the parent is rendering the child component current date, but in order to finish that, you need to render the actual date of when you're doing it, the actual date. And for that, you've been told to access it from the JavaScript date object. Property is already passed on from the calendar to the child, which is to the current date, which is date property is already been passed off in the previous line. Here, all you need to do is to render that. So what date is it? So how do you access and how do you render that here? So that you can actually see on the UI the actual current date, as in date, time, year, day, exact to the minute and to the second, the time, or the actual lifetime. Now here you'll find I was coding on this particular day, so my time will be different from the time when you're watching this. So I want you to code along with me when you're doing this, so that you'll be seeing the different time and date as per when you're doing it. Just to tell you, because you may be surprised why it's coming different. That's because the date object that will be rendered in your component will be following the time zone of your code editor as and when you're doing it actually. So that's the beauty of it. So date, again the curly brackets, and you've been told to access the JavaScript date object. How do you write that? Date that starts with a capital D, date and parenthesis, the date object. So date, here you are just calling and rendering it. So current date inside that. So that means the current date here is a child component, and the child component can now access and render the property passed on from the parent. And what is the property? Date. So date equals the JavaScript date object. Yeah, just mention it within that, within the child. And then you just kind of check it out. Yeah, date equal. This is already provided in your question. Yeah, so don't forget the curly brackets. That must be really important for you to render it from, in order to call and render from the JavaScript date object. Otherwise, it will not work. Yeah, so that's about it. You've already finished. So it's quite simple as that. create a property in the parent, pass it on to the child, then render it in the child and access. The current date is Friday, October 8, 2021, 12:38 point, even to the second GMT time. Here it's even following the country zone and time. But when you do in your country and your date, particular date, you will get that actual fact, actual date zone, the date which is following your zonal code. Yeah? Country code, zonal code, or whatever. So that's why you need to call the date object. So as you've seen, it's quite simple, right? So it's always like this. Whenever you're doing any other coding for any other app, or you're building any other app, it's always like this. Remember, when you're passing the property, you're always passing the property from the parent to the child. Property is created in the parent, passed on to the child, and then the child can then render and access it also. Why? Because it is a stateless functional component. Then only you can access it this way, then only you can render it this way by the child. And then only you can pass it this way from the parent to the child. And be very careful, do not get confused by the arrow function. All this means is I really want you to write down function welcome within the parenthesis props as an argument, and then the curly brackets, and then followed by the h1 tag and hello props.user. If you do that, you will get the same result. That's just a different way of doing it. You can use constant or you can write function. Either ways, this is a functional stateless component. So smash that subscribe button and do not forget to share and like this video towards your JavaScript loving journey. Okay, if you really want to become a pure React developer, do smash that button, subscribe button. And subscribe to that bell icon. Smash that bell icon, sorry.